From early on in my childhood, I lived a privileged middle-class suburban lifestyle. I was never in want of anything. I was comfortable and assumed that those around me felt the same comfort. I grew up in small-town USA in an upper middle-class neighborhood surrounded by white neighbors and friends. Eagle, Colorado, currently populated by about 7,000 people, is filled with only 3 races: whites, Mexicans, and other. There are 2 public high schools throughout the county, where 52% of the students are white and 45% are Mexican. The school system is highly rated and filled with wonderful teachers. Students of all races and colors attend the same 2 schools. Growing up in such a small community, it felt as if everyone was given equal opportunities and resources in and outside of school. What I realize now, looking back on my adolescence, is I was colorblind to the separation that existed within the schools and community. My white privilege clouded what was really happening within my own hometown. In school, it was common for most students to be involved in sports and clubs. It was something that everyone participated in. It was often said that our school was so wonderful because everybody got along. There were no cliques. What I realize now is that segregation existed within the school hallways I walked every day, and that a lack of opportunity was provided for the Mexican students. There clearly were cliques, the whites and the Mexicans. The line between the 2 was rarely crossed. Each race stuck to its own sports, its own clubs, its own neighborhoods, and its own people. The reason that I assumed all students grew up comfortably and that all students had the same opportunities I did was because the individuals I was surrounded by were in no way diverse. I, like many others, stuck close to the people I knew. I stuck with my own race. I looked past the lack of diversity in the classroom and the fact that the Mexican students often fell behind because of the language barrier. I looked past the fact that I lived in a nice neighborhood and drove a nice car while many of the Mexican students lived in trailer parks. I failed to acknowledge that while I was applying to colleges and living off my parents' incomes, many of them were supporting their families or beginning to raise their own while trying to attend high school at the same time. Subconsciously, I had decided that if I ignored the fact that I was so comfortable and privileged while those around me were living such a different lifestyle, then maybe it wasn't real. I, like so many others, decided to ignore my privilege for what it was worth. What I know about diversity, what I could have learned from my fellow classmates, was rather learned from the media and popular culture. Instead of taking advantage of living in such a diverse community, I instead made assumptions about other races based on my rare interactions with the Mexican students, the opinions of my family members, and the media. It wasn't until my senior year of high school and well into my college years that I began to submerge myself into diverse communities and cultures through travel. I had spent so many years of my life thinking that the rest of the world lived the same way that I did, that I was shocked to find other cultures to be so colorful, so diverse, and so much different than my own. I began to understand the privileges that I had ungratefully accepted. I became ashamed of the things that I had grown up with that so many others had never had. I traveled all over the world. I ventured to several countries in Europe, to a few in South America, and to China, where I was exposed to a large amount of diversity and in some situations poverty. During my senior year of high school, I took a trip to Costa Rica that to this day has humbled me. In the beginning of the trip, I spent time exploring the rainforest and living the high life. But during the last week of our trip, myself and 16 other white students participated in a homestay on Isla Chira, an island that can barely be found on a map. My host family, some of the most wonderful people I have ever met, took me in as their own. It is safe to say that within the first few hours of my stay, I was in culture shock. I was in a home with no windows, cockroaches, and a hose used as a shower. What I found amazing during my stay on this impoverished island was the community and pride that my Costa Rican family and their community held. It didn't matter what they had, it mattered who they were. The classrooms on the island had nothing but a few desks and a chalkboard, but the students were thrilled to learn. The trip made me realize that my comfortable and materialistic upbringing didn't make me any better than the people I had spent my week with. It only made me more fortunate. My race meant nothing to them, and neither did my belongings. What mattered was who I was as an individual. I was humbled by the experience, but I hadn't yet changed my actions as a white privileged female. Years later, during my time in college, while studying criminal justice and psychology at the University of Colorado, Denver, I worked as an intern at Denver Juvenile Probation. Many of my clients were from diverse backgrounds and came from very little opportunity. During my time as an intern, I worked with clients on a probation basis and as a GED tutor. After my trip to Costa Rica, after being humbled by my host family, I tried to incorporate my newfound emotions with my internship. I realize now that in the beginning, what I ended up perpetuating was the idea of a white savior. I was the well-off, middle-class college student trying to tell teenagers from different upbringings how they should act. I was humbled by what I had experienced, but I hadn't lived through it, and I had trouble relating to the students. I wanted to save them instead of truly understanding them. In the beginning, I struggled connecting with my clients. It wasn't until I began spending more time as a GED tutor that I found how important it was to get to know my clients instead of just telling them what to do, telling them what was right and what was wrong. I found that if I took the time to learn something personable about each client, that if I was able to somehow relate whatever GED subject we were focusing on back to their own lives, that I would slowly begin to develop relationships with the clients. I became more culturally and self-aware. I found that relating to people instead of trying to save them would greatly benefit me in any career that I decided to pursue. Instead of just being humbled by others, I was beginning to push aside my whiteness and understand others for who they are, not the color of their skin. I have found through my education and life experiences that I still have a lot of unlearning to do as a result of my sheltered upbringing, but I am well on my way to being a caring and understanding educator. I have found that because of my past and my segregated education, that I have made judgments about others because of their diverse backgrounds. I have begun to eliminate my preconceived notions of others, and I have begun to take a step back to better understand those around me. As an educator and as a white female, I have come to accept that my privileged upbringing and conscious decisions have defined me as an individual, but it is never too late to change. I want to be an educator that works to eliminate judgment and celebrates diversity. I want a classroom where every student feels comfortable acting as himself or herself, where every student is proud of their own and their fellow classmates' backgrounds. I hope to be a mentor that students look up to, that students strive to be, not because of the whiteness of my skin, but because of the content of my character.